Hello, everyone. Welcome to Sleep Space. Tonight, we will talk about something deeply mysterious yet deeply personal. Where does your consciousness go when you sleep? This is one of those questions that seems simple at first, but the deeper you look, the more reality itself begins to bend around it. We're going to explore what happens to your awareness, your sense of self, your inner world, when your body lies still in sleep. Is your consciousness just turned off, or is it slipping somewhere else, somewhere beyond, or maybe even into another version of reality altogether? Before we dive in, let me ask you, where are you listening from? And what time is it right now for you? Midnight, 3 a.m.? Maybe the sun's just starting to rise. Whatever the hour, you're here. And that means your mind is ready to explore what lies beneath the surface of waking life. So let's begin. You fall asleep every night. It seems automatic. You brush your teeth, close your eyes, and the world disappears. But have you ever asked yourself, where do you go during that time? Yes, biologically, your body rests. Your brain follows a pattern of electrical waves. Your breathing slows. But what about you, the part of you that's aware of being you? This is the mystery at the heart of consciousness itself. Because when you're awake, it's obvious. You're aware, thinking, deciding, reacting. But when you're asleep, especially in deep, dreamless sleep, you're not reacting. You don't even remember anything. And yet somehow, you still exist. So let's take this step by step. First, what do we actually mean when we say consciousness? Neuroscience defines consciousness as the state of being aware of and able to think about one's own existence, sensations, thoughts, and surroundings. It's self-awareness, inner experience, that quiet narrator behind your eyes. Now here's where things get strange. We don't actually know what consciousness is made of. It isn't like blood or bone. You can't cut open a brain and point to a piece of it and say, ah, yes, there is consciousness. Instead, it seems to emerge from activity in the brain. But how and why it emerges remains unsolved. And this makes sleep especially strange, because when you go to sleep, your brain is still active, but your experience of being conscious dramatically changes. Let's talk about brainwaves. When you're awake and alert, your brain hums in what are called beta waves, fast, high-frequency oscillations that reflect alert cognitive activity. But as you get drowsy, your brain shifts into alpha, then theta, and eventually delta waves as you fall into deep sleep. These are slower, more rhythmic patterns, but they're not random, they're structured and meaningful. During this transition, your consciousness doesn't just turn off, it morphs. You begin to dream, and in dreams, you're often not aware you're dreaming. Your thoughts are strange, fluid, sometimes surreal. You can be flying, seeing impossible things, interacting with people who are no longer alive, and none of it feels odd. You accept it until you wake up and realize it wasn't real. But was it truly not real? Think about that carefully. In a dream, your mind creates a world. It feels real. You react to it emotionally. You form memories inside of it. Your dream consciousness has its own narrative. So is your consciousness really asleep, or has it simply shifted modes? Some scientists argue that dreaming is just your brain firing randomly, trying to consolidate memories. But others believe dreaming, and what happens to consciousness during sleep, could be a deeper window into what your awareness actually is. Here's where some of the theories get wild. One theory, known as integrated information theory, suggests that consciousness is the result of the brain's ability to integrate vast amounts of information into a unified experience. That means it's not about the parts, but how the parts interact. The more connected and dynamic the system, the more conscious it becomes. Now imagine what happens in sleep. The brain begins shutting down certain forms of sensory input and motor output. But internal integration remains high during REM sleep, the phase where you dream the most vividly. That might explain why dreams feel immersive. Your consciousness is still very much online, just disconnected from external reality. But other theories go even further. There's the global workspace theory, which sees consciousness as the brain broadcasting certain pieces of information across many specialized networks. It's like the spotlight in a dark theatre. Only what gets illuminated is conscious. The rest is backstage, processing without your awareness. When you sleep, that spotlight moves. It begins shining on internal stimuli, memories, emotions, mental simulations, rather than on the outside world. But here's a question that breaks the model. What about during deep, dreamless sleep, when there are no stories, no mental images, just blackness? This is what scientists call non-REM stage 3 sleep, sometimes called slow wave sleep. It's the deepest kind, and most people don't remember anything from it. But some traditions, especially in meditation and Eastern philosophy, claim that even then, some faint thread of awareness continues. A baseline consciousness that never fully disappears. Is that true? Is there always a you behind the veil, even in the most silent depths of sleep? This is where things get even stranger. Let's step out of Western science for a moment and look at what some ancient traditions say. In Vedanta philosophy, consciousness is not something the brain produces. It is the fundamental substance of the universe. According to this view, your mind and body are just temporary forms moving through a field of awareness that never sleeps. In deep sleep, your personal identity vanishes, but pure consciousness remains. This is called turiya, the fourth state of consciousness beyond waking, dreaming, and sleeping. Some advanced meditation practitioners even claim they can remain aware during deep sleep, observing the absence of thought. Not dreaming, not thinking, just aware. From a scientific standpoint, that's difficult to verify. But there have been EEG studies showing that highly experienced meditators exhibit unusual brain activity during deep sleep, more like wakefulness than rest. Could it be that consciousness doesn't vanish in sleep? It just slips beneath the threshold of your usual perception. Now let's talk about another idea, lucid dreaming. This is where your consciousness wakes up inside a dream. You realize you're dreaming, and you can even control the dream world. It feels astonishing, like you're inside your own holodeck. Lucid dreaming proves something important. Your conscious self can remain present in the dream world. You can retain your sense of identity, memory, and agency, even in an altered state. So if you can do that in a dream, what else is possible? Are there other layers of consciousness that we normally don't access, except through sleep, trance, or altered states? That's a question researchers are actively exploring. Some even believe that sleep may be a kind of gateway, a shifting of the signal from one frequency to another, like changing the channel on a radio. The you that's awake is tuned into one frequency. The you in dreams is tuned into another. And perhaps, just perhaps, there are more frequencies we haven't yet learned how to access. Of course, we have to be careful not to jump to conclusions. Science is still learning what consciousness is, and sleep is one of the best laboratories we have for studying it. Every night, your mind travels through different dimensions of experience, some vivid, some empty. some forgotten. But what remains constant? The possibility of awareness. Even when the storyline stops, even when the world disappears, there's still something there. Something unmeasurable but undeniable. A witnessing presence that you carry with you into the dark. Not always remembered, not always named, but always waiting. So tonight, when you drift off, maybe ask yourself, where am I going? Let's look more closely at what your brain is actually doing when you fall asleep. Because though it might feel like you disappear into darkness, your brain doesn't shut off. It reorganizes. Sleep isn't a single state, it's a cycle. You pass through several stages again and again each night. Each of these stages affects your consciousness differently. Stage 1 is light sleep. You drift in and out. Your thoughts are fragmented. You might experience hypnagogic hallucinations, brief dreamlike images or sounds. These can be bizarre, sometimes even jarring. It's the borderland between waking and sleeping, and it's incredibly fertile ground for consciousness studies. Why? Because here, you're neither fully awake nor fully unconscious. You still have one foot in reality and one in the dream world. Your sense of self begins to loosen, but it's still reachable. Then you move into stage 2. Your body relaxes further, brain activity slows, you're less aware of your surroundings. If someone were to ask you a question, you likely wouldn't respond. But if they woke you, you might say, I wasn't asleep. That's how subtly consciousness shifts here. You're no longer tracking the external world, but your inner world hasn't fully taken over. Then you enter stage 3, deep sleep. This is where your brain emits delta waves. Slow, high-amplitude waves associated with restoration. Your consciousness appears to vanish. This is when it's hardest to wake you. From the outside, it looks like you're gone. But from the inside, that's the mystery. This stage raises a powerful question. Can consciousness exist without content? Most of our experiences involve something, a thought, a feeling, a dream. But during deep sleep, those vanish. Yet you're not dead. You're not unconscious in the clinical sense. You're alive, the brain is active, but there's no narrative. This leads to a profound idea that consciousness might be more than just experience. It might be the capacity for experience itself, like an empty screen that remains even when nothing is being projected onto it. Then, something incredible happens. You rise out of deep sleep and enter REM sleep, rapid eye movement. This is where most dreaming occurs. Your brainwaves suddenly resemble those of an awake person. Heart rate rises. Eyes move rapidly behind your lids. And in your mind, a new world explodes into being. You're inside a dream, a full-blown simulation. And here, your consciousness takes on a different shape. Dreams are often nonlinear. You might be in your childhood home, talking to a version of someone who's no longer alive, while knowing it's the future. Emotions are heightened, logic is softened, and yet it all feels real. So what exactly is going on here? One theory suggests that REM dreaming is a form of internal training ground. The brain is rehearsing social situations, testing reactions, solving problems. It's creating a simulated world to prepare you for the real one. But what if that simulation is more than practice? What if it's another mode of reality entirely? Some researchers, like Dr. Alan Hobson, argue that dreaming represents the brain's attempt to create meaning from chaotic neural activity. But others, like Carl Jung, believe dreams were messages from the unconscious mind, archetypal, symbolic communications from the depths of the psyche. In that view, dreams aren't random, they're significant. And when you enter them, your consciousness doesn't disappear. It becomes a traveler in a symbolic inner world. Now, if that sounds abstract, consider this. Your brain has the power to create entire environments while you sleep. It can generate landscapes, people, conversations, and events without any input from the external world. Your waking consciousness uses sensory data to form experience. But in dreams, your brain becomes the source of that data. That suggests something powerful. Consciousness is not dependent on external stimuli. It can create its own world. So when you're asleep, your consciousness may not leave. It may transform into a world builder. And here's where the idea becomes profound. Think about this. If your brain can simulate a world so rich that you believe you're really in it, how do you know waking life isn't also a kind of simulation? This is where sleep research starts touching the edges of philosophy. If dreams can feel real but aren't, how do you define what real means? If your consciousness can exist in multiple states, waking, dreaming, lucid, meditative, who or what is the constant observer through all of them? There's also something else worth mentioning: memory. Most people don't remember 90% of their dreams. In fact, many people say they don't dream at all. But EEG scans show otherwise. They do dream. They just don't recall the dream. This tells us that consciousness can be active, even if you don't have access to that activity when you wake up. It's like a firewall between your sleeping and waking selves. So now we must ask, is memory essential for consciousness? If you were conscious during sleep but didn't remember it, were you really there? Some researchers say yes. There are studies involving people who experience sleep paralysis, where the body is asleep but the mind is awake. Many of them describe vivid awareness, a strong sense of self, and terrifying hallucinations. They are awake within the sleep state, and that tells us something very strange. Consciousness can be isolated from body movement and even ordinary thought. It doesn't need to go anywhere. It might already be everywhere inside you. But there's more. Let's talk about the default mode network, a network of interacting brain regions that lights up when you're not focused on the outside world. It's most active when you're daydreaming, reflecting, or mind-wandering. Interestingly, this same network is less active during deep sleep, but can flare back up during REM sleep and lucid dreaming. That suggests your sense of self, the narrator voice in your head, is deeply tied to this network. During sleep, when the default mode network powers down, your ego dissolves. You lose the storyline of I am me and this is my life. But when it powers up again, in dreams or lucid moments, you return. The sense of identity reforms, even if it's within a dream scenario. So where does consciousness go? The answer may be nowhere. It never goes. It simply changes shape. Like water becoming steam or ice. Your consciousness is still part of your system, just tuned to a different state. And there's another model that's gaining interest: predictive processing. This theory suggests that the brain is constantly predicting the world around it. It builds models of reality based on past experience and current input. When predictions match reality, all is well. When they don't, the brain updates its model. In sleep, particularly REM, the brain is cut off from external input, but it still runs the predictive machinery, just without feedback. This may be why dreams are so strange. The brain is testing predictions in an isolated loop, but your consciousness is still part of that loop. It rides through these simulations like a passenger on a ghost train, watching, feeling, reacting. So perhaps we need to stop thinking of sleep as a time when consciousness disappears, and instead think of it as a time when it experiments. It withdraws from the physical world and begins to simulate others, some symbolic, some nonsensical, some deeply emotional. And sometimes, in the case of lucid dreams, you step into the role of architect. You are still there, just wearing a different mask. The mystery is not that consciousness vanishes during sleep, but that it's so flexible, so shape-shifting, so able to become something other than what you think of as you. The sleeping brain is a theatre, and your consciousness, it seems, is both the audience and the stage. As we continue peeling back the layers of sleep and consciousness, we come to a fascinating and uncomfortable truth. The person you think of as you is not as fixed or continuous as you believe. During waking life, your consciousness feels stable. You have a name, a memory, a body. You move through time in a mostly linear way. But when you fall asleep, that identity, your sense of self, softens, fragments, sometimes disappears entirely. And yet, some form of consciousness seems to remain. This brings us to the idea of the self model, the brain's internal map of who you are. Neuroscientists like Thomas Metzinger propose that the self is not a thing, but a process. Your brain continuously generates a model of you using sensory data, memory, and prediction. This model includes your physical body, your emotions, your beliefs, even your past and future. But this model is not consciousness itself. It's a construction inside consciousness. And that's a key distinction. When you sleep, this self-model dissolves. The link between external sensory input and internal story breaks. Your body still exists, but you stop tracking it. You no longer check your phone. You don't plan. You don't compare yourself to others. You are, in many ways, free of the burden of identity. And yet, there's still a field of awareness, a space in which things happen. That space might be full of dream imagery. It might be empty, but it's still present. So let's go deeper into what sleep teaches us about the self. In dreams, your identity can shift. You might dream you're younger. You might be someone else entirely. You might be in two places at once. These violations of logic are not seen as errors in the dream. They're accepted. The rules of identity bend, and your consciousness adapts. What this suggests is that your sense of self is not hardwired. It's flexible, contextual, a function of the brain's current state. And during sleep, that context is radically different. Now here's where the science meets the strange. Studies using fMRI scans have shown that during REM sleep, regions of the brain associated with emotional processing, visual imagination, and autobiographical memory become highly active. But regions involved in logical reasoning and self-monitoring, like the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, become less active. That means your dream self is running on emotion, memory, and imagery, with reduced access to rational thought and self-evaluation. You can be terrified in a dream, or fall in love with a stranger, or run through a city made of clouds, and it all feels meaningful, even sacred. But it often lacks logic. So what does that tell us about consciousness? It tells us that your awareness does not require the self to operate. The narrative of me is just one type of experience your brain can generate. And sleep proves that this experience is not always present. You can still be conscious, still feel, react, and remember without the usual boundaries of ego. Let's bring in another perspective here: psychedelics. Why? Because the altered states induced by psychedelics like psilocybin and DMT have strong parallels with dreaming and may help us understand how consciousness behaves when the self dissolves. Users often describe ego death, a loss of personal identity, yet they remain aware, sometimes profoundly so. They describe being a witness to experience, floating in a space beyond time, beyond language, beyond self. These reports echo the descriptions of certain stages of sleep, especially those where the dreamer becomes lucid or has out-of-body sensations. In fact, REM sleep and psychedelic states share neurological similarities. Both involve activation of the visual cortex, emotional centers like the amygdala, and the default mode network shifting into new patterns. This suggests that consciousness in both states may be accessing alternate configurations, modes of awareness not bound by the waking ego. And that raises a possibility. Maybe consciousness isn't tied to who you are. Maybe it's simply the capacity to experience, regardless of what's being experienced, or who's experiencing it. So let's return to deep sleep for a moment. In that dark, dreamless void, your body is resting, your mind is still. And yet, when you wake up, you say, "I slept." You were there. Something was there. But what? Some traditions suggest that this is pure consciousness, undiluted by identity or perception, not experiencing anything but still existing, like the blank canvas before the painting. This idea appears across cultures. In Buddhist philosophy, especially in Dzogchen and Zen, there is the concept of rigpa, pure awareness that remains constant through all changing states. It's not your thoughts, it's not your emotions, it's not even your memories. It's the space in which all those things appear and disappear. And during deep sleep, that space is still present, just not populated with content. Some advanced meditators claim they can maintain awareness during deep sleep, not of dreams, but of silence. Total stillness. A conscious presence that observes the absence of form. Modern neuroscience struggles to test this, but EEG scans of long-time meditators do show unusual patterns. Sustained alpha and theta waves during states that normally produce delta waves. This suggests that conscious awareness might not fully shut down in sleep for some individuals. Instead, it transforms into a non-verbal, non-narrative presence. Could this mean that consciousness is always on, always present, even when the self disappears? If so, then the question isn't where consciousness goes when you sleep, but what form it takes. Now let's bring in one final idea, dreamless awareness. Most of us assume that sleep is binary. Either we're dreaming or we're unconscious. But studies show there are subtle gradations of awareness that don't fit either category. People report being aware of being asleep, not dreaming, not thinking, just aware, floating, timeless. This kind of consciousness doesn't have a narrative, it doesn't speak, it doesn't even think, but it notices. And it may be more common than we realize. Sleep researchers now suspect there are micro-states of consciousness during sleep, brief moments of wake-like awareness that pass unnoticed, but are part of the cycle. Your consciousness might dip in and out of various levels, fluctuating between selfhood and formlessness, between perception and absence. This paints a new picture of sleep, not as a blackout, but as a shifting mosaic of experiences. Some remembered, some not. Some structured, some wild. Some deeply personal, others beyond the ego entirely. And in all of it, consciousness is not absent, it's changing. Now that we understand how fluid and flexible consciousness becomes in sleep, it's time to explore something even stranger. What if sleep isn't just a place of rest or internal reflection, but a portal? Every night you lie down and lose contact with physical reality. You close your eyes and your sensory systems gradually disconnect from the world around you. You stop responding to touch, to sound, to light. Your waking narrative dissolves. You stop being someone with a history and a future. And yet, something else begins. Dreamscapes, symbols, feelings that don't always belong to your waking mind. And sometimes, these experiences feel more real than anything you know during the day. Why is that? Let's examine the possibility that sleep grants consciousness access to more than just memories and emotions, that it may allow your awareness to step into other frameworks entirely. First, we must acknowledge that our concept of time breaks down in dreams. In waking life, we experience time as linear, one moment after another, always moving forward. But in dreams, a single instant can stretch into hours. Events that should take time happen instantly. You might be in one place and then suddenly in another, with no memory of moving between them. This kind of temporal fluidity points to something important. Consciousness doesn't require linear time to function. In fact, consciousness might not be rooted in time at all. Here's what that means. Your brain processes time through structures like the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which tracks light and keeps your circadian rhythm stable. But your conscious awareness, your actual experience, can exist outside of those rhythms. Dreams prove this. So does meditation. So do altered states. There are people who have had vivid dream experiences that seem to stretch across years, entire lifetimes even, only to wake up and realize just minutes have passed. Their consciousness entered a kind of non-linear dimension where time is not measured but felt. If your sense of time can warp so easily, what does that say about reality itself? Could it be that time is not something your consciousness moves through, but something your consciousness constructs? And if time is a construct, what else might be? Let's introduce a provocative idea: multiverses of the mind. In quantum physics, the many worlds interpretation suggests that all possible outcomes of every decision or quantum event exist in parallel. Every time you make a choice, the universe branches. You go left in one, right in another. You take the job in one version, and in another you don't. These worlds don't interact in the waking state. But what if consciousness, when unanchored from the sensory body, can drift across these layers? Some researchers have proposed that dreaming could be a kind of low-fidelity access to alternate timelines. Your brain tuning into versions of events that didn't happen in your waking life, but exist in the vast field of possibility. And maybe that's why some dreams feel so eerily familiar, like you've been there before, even when you haven't. Or why you wake from a dream with the emotional residue of a life you didn't live, a love you never met, a grief that doesn't belong to your story. Where did those emotions come from? It may be that consciousness, freed from the constraints of linear time and singular identity, becomes capable of dipping into other realities, other selves. Some sleep researchers have documented cases of people reporting consistent dream landscapes over months or years. Entire dream cities with recurring people, geographies, even politics. This isn't random memory recall. It feels like visiting, like traveling, like dropping back into a parallel continuity. And while science can't confirm the metaphysics of this, it does have a name for the phenomenon: dream continuity theory. It suggests that dreams may tap into unconscious constructs your brain returns to regularly. Constructs that feel like separate worlds, But from a consciousness standpoint, the key point is this. Sleep may allow your awareness to decouple from this timeline, this body, this identity, and explore others. And it's not only dreams that hint at this. Let's talk about out-of-body experiences, or OBEs. These are events where a person reports feeling themselves leave their body during sleep or paralysis. They may float above themselves, see their physical form in bed, even travel to places and observe things they couldn't physically know. While many OBEs can be explained neurologically, through disruptions in the temporoparietal junction or other regions responsible for body mapping, not all are so easily dismissed. Some OBEs include verifiable observations of events that occurred while the person was asleep. These cases are rare, but they force us to ask, is it possible that consciousness, once freed from the body, can perceive things at a distance? We don't have hard proof, but the implications are staggering. Because if consciousness is not bound by the body, or even space, then sleep may be the most consistent method we have of glimpsing that freedom. There's also the phenomenon of hypnagogic and hypnopompic states, the brief windows of awareness as you're falling asleep and waking up. During these moments, strange experiences are common. Hearing voices, seeing geometric patterns, feeling like you're falling or flying, encountering presences. These aren't full dreams, they're threshold states. States where the conscious mind is beginning to let go of the body, but hasn't fully entered the dream world. And they are often rich with vivid, sometimes surreal imagery. Some people even use these threshold states to induce lucid dreams or astral projections, deliberate transitions into an altered space where they retain full awareness. Whether these experiences are psychological or truly transdimensional is up for debate, but either way, they demonstrate that consciousness in sleep isn't passive, it's exploratory. Let's think about this another way. Imagine you are standing at the edge of a forest. In waking life, you follow the paved roads. You know the paths, the rules, the landmarks. But when you fall asleep, you leave the roads. You step into the woods. You lose the map, and your consciousness, stripped of coordinates, begins to explore terrain that is wild, ancient, and strangely familiar. That forest may be memory, it may be imagination, it may be the unconscious, or it may be something else entirely, something you don't yet have language for. But what we do know is this. When you sleep, your consciousness does not vanish. It transforms, it loosens from the body, from the ego, from the rigid laws of time and space. And what remains is a kind of presence that is both ancient and mysterious. A presence that can observe impossible scenes, that can travel without movement, that can feel emotions from lives not lived, that can receive insights in images and metaphors rather than words. Some might call this dreaming, others might call it traveling. Still others might call it remembering something older than this life. Whatever the truth is, it's clear that sleep is not just a biological function. It is a gateway, a tunnel through which your awareness slides every night, unknowing and unresisting. And when you return, you carry only fragments of where you've been. But those fragments might be clues, messages, echoes from a deeper dimension of consciousness. Where do you go when you sleep? Maybe. The better question is, what are you when you're free of the body and the clock and the mirror? By now, you've seen that consciousness isn't static. It moves, it stretches, it shifts, sometimes subtly, sometimes dramatically. And sleep might be the single most fascinating stage where this transformation unfolds. But now we have to look at something deeper, the source of consciousness itself. If you can dream without knowing it's a dream, if your identity can dissolve and rebuild across different mental landscapes, if your sense of reality itself can change while you sleep, then what or who is the dreamer? You might assume it's your brain, that the cortex fires, patterns emerge, and consciousness is simply the result of neurons dancing. But that's still only describing the mechanism, not the experience itself. Let's go back to the question, where are you when you're not awake? Not just your body or your memory, but that quiet awareness behind it all. The one that listens to your thoughts rather than being made of them. Some neuroscientists suggest that this core self is just an illusion. A useful illusion, but still a byproduct of evolved cognition. That you are a program, a sum of functions. But that explanation breaks down when it tries to explain how a purely biological machine can feel anything. It can process data, but it cannot know it's processing. Yet here you are, aware of your own awareness. So sleep throws a wrench in the system, because when you sleep, that core self vanishes from the usual interface. You don't remember your name, you don't check your phone, you don't plan, and yet you still experience. This leads to a profound possibility that consciousness is not created by thought. It is the container in which thought arises, not a product of content, but the stage on which content plays. Let's return to dreams. When you're inside a dream, you accept the dream as real. But if you become lucid, if you realize you're dreaming, everything changes. The dream doesn't stop, but you do. The you that normally reacts, forgets, and follows blindly suddenly becomes aware. You're no longer just a character. You're a participant and an observer at once. This is the key. There is a part of consciousness that can witness itself, that can observe the story without being caught in it. And this witnessing presence does not vanish when the dream ends. It simply recedes when you identify too deeply with what you're seeing. So here's a strange but serious question. What if consciousness doesn't originate from the brain at all? This isn't just spiritual speculation. In theoretical physics and consciousness studies, there's growing interest in the idea that consciousness might be fundamental to reality, not emergent. The physicist Max Planck, the father of quantum theory, once said that consciousness is fundamental and that all matter derives from it, not the other way around. That flips everything. Instead of your brain creating consciousness like a factory producing electricity, maybe your brain is like a receiver, a tuning device picking up awareness that already exists. Like a radio that doesn't generate the music, but catches it. That would mean your consciousness isn't in your brain. Your brain is simply shaping the experience of being conscious. Now apply this to sleep. When you fall asleep, the receiver changes channels. You're no longer picking up waking consciousness, but another stream, one full of images, symbols, silence, mystery. You're not gone, you're just tuned elsewhere. This theory isn't provable yet, but it helps explain things science still can't. Like near-death experiences, which often include lucid, structured consciousness even when the brain is barely functioning, or shared dreams, where multiple people report overlapping dream content, or the sudden insights and downloads that appear in dreams with no logical source. Even Carl Jung believed that dreams connect us to something larger, a collective unconscious, a shared field of symbolic material that transcends individual memory. When you sleep, you don't just dive into your own mind, you dip into a deeper reservoir. And that brings us to the possibility that your consciousness, in sleep becomes less individual and more universal. Have you ever had a dream where you weren't you, where you were the sky or a crowd or a creature without name, where your identity was vague but the experience was vivid? These dreams suggest that your sense of self is not fixed. It's a costume your consciousness wears, and in sleep, it often drops the costume. From the outside, sleep looks like a shutdown, but from the inside, it may be more like a return, a homecoming, a step back into the ocean from which your waking mind was carved. We often say, "I was unconscious during sleep," but that's only because you don't remember. What if the forgetting is part of the design? What if you're meant to forget what happens there? Because what you see in that place is not meant to fit inside the structure of waking logic. Think of it like this. Consciousness has layers. The waking self is the surface. Logical, sensory, reactive. Beneath that is the dreaming self. Emotional, symbolic, flexible. And beneath that, there may be a root consciousness. A silent awareness that is present even in dreamless sleep. Not thinking, not imagining, just being. This base layer doesn't speak. It doesn't act. But it is the one that watches the mind rise and fall. The one that comes back every morning when you open your eyes. We've explored some big picture ideas, what it means to be conscious, whether your brain is a receiver rather than a generator, and how dreams might offer access to deeper or even collective layers of awareness. But now let's zoom in and focus on something very concrete, the brain itself. Because no matter what else is true, this 3-pound organ in your skull is undeniably involved in how you experience consciousness. And there's something very strange going on inside it. First, consider this. Your brain is split in two. The left hemisphere and the right hemisphere connected by a bundle of nerve fibers called the corpus callosum. Under normal circumstances, these two halves constantly communicate. But what happens if you separate them? In rare cases, usually to treat severe epilepsy, surgeons have cut the corpus callosum, creating what's called a split brain patient. After the surgery, these individuals seem completely normal at first. They walk, talk, think, and remember just like anyone else. But when tested under controlled conditions, something bizarre appears. Each hemisphere starts to act like it has its own consciousness. The left brain, which controls the right side of the body and usually handles language, can say what it's seeing. The right brain, which controls the left side and processes more visual and spatial information, can't speak. But it can act. In tests, when different images are shown to each half of the brain, each hand responds in ways that suggest independent awareness. One hemisphere might be laughing while the other is confused. One might believe in God while the other claims to be an atheist. Some patients even report feeling like there are two minds living inside them, coexisting but separate. This suggests that consciousness might not be a singular thing. It may be composed of many modules, many centers of processing and awareness that normally work together so smoothly you never notice the complexity. But during sleep, those modules become untethered. The unity of the waking self dissolves, and fragments begin to roam. You may speak in your dreams with one voice, but feel with another. You may see yourself from outside your body, acting on instincts that don't match your usual personality. This could be because your sleeping brain allows the separate processes of consciousness to operate more freely, without the executive center constantly coordinating them. So what does that mean for you? It means that who you think you are, your inner narrator, your thoughts, your feelings, is a dynamic collaboration. When you sleep, that collaboration loosens, the parts drift, and consciousness becomes a fluid thing, reshaped by whichever module happens to be active. The neuroscientist Giulio Tononi developed a theory called integrated information theory, IIT, which suggests that consciousness arises from the degree to which a system integrates information. A unified conscious experience, according to IIT, requires that the system be both differentiated and unified, many parts deeply connected. This fits sleep perfectly. When you fall asleep, connectivity across brain regions changes dramatically. Especially during REM sleep, some areas light up, like the visual cortex, the limbic system, and memory areas, while the prefrontal cortex, responsible for logic and self-awareness, goes quiet. This change disrupts the unified sense of self. In a way, your consciousness doesn't go anywhere when you sleep. It just becomes less integrated. It shatters into fragments, visuals, emotions, symbols, urges, and you experience each piece as though it's the whole. That's why dreams often feel real and yet nonsensical, because the part of your mind that normally says this doesn't make sense isn't active. But there's more. In lucid dreaming, some people learn to re-engage that logical center, to wake up inside the dream. What's fascinating is that brain scans show increased activity in the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex during lucid dreams, the very area responsible for self-reflective thought. That suggests consciousness is like a dial. You can turn the integration up or down. Full integration, waking awareness. Partial integration, dreaming. Zero integration, deep sleep, perhaps even unconsciousness. But the pieces of consciousness may still be present in every state, just no longer working in unison. This is why sleep can be such a mystery, because your conscious mind is still there, just reorganized, and that opens the door to even stranger possibilities. Some dream researchers have proposed that dreams are not random byproducts of the brain's maintenance work, but evolutionary adaptations that allow you to simulate threats, rehearse social scenarios, and even explore internal conflict safely. That would mean dreams are purposeful, not chaos, but inner worlds, constructed each night by different pieces of you. Think about it. Every dream you've ever had was made from you, but not always by you. Some dreams feel authored by a force you don't control. Some characters act with minds of their own. Some environments shift and respond like living systems. And sometimes you encounter presences, figures you don't recognize, but who seem to know you. Psychologists might call these projections of your unconscious, but if consciousness can be split, if your brain holds multiple systems of awareness, then who's to say these dream figures aren't fragments of you, subsystems with their own goals and memories? Even more radically, what if some of them are not parts of you? We'll explore that soon, but first let's stay grounded. What we know is this: during sleep, consciousness becomes decentralized. It's no longer run by the executive center that oversees waking life. Instead, the emotional brain, the visual brain, and the procedural brain start interacting in new ways. They generate dreams, they process memories, they simulate scenarios, and sometimes they create new insights, solutions to problems you couldn't solve while awake. Artists, scientists, and inventors throughout history have credited dreams with breakthroughs. From Paul McCartney's Yesterday to the invention of the sewing machine, to Dmitri Mendeleev dreaming the periodic table, something in the sleeping mind knows, something works while the rest of you sleeps. That thing might be your deeper intelligence, the part of you that doesn't need language, that sees patterns, that connects dots without explanation, and it only emerges when the normal rules are turned off. So the question becomes, is that intelligence you, or is it something that works through you, only visible when the noise of daily thought fades? Whatever the answer, the sleeping brain shows us this. Consciousness is layered, modular, and mysterious. It can exist in many forms. It can fragment, transform, and reintegrate. And no matter how much we think we understand it, there's always something just beneath the surface, waiting to wake. When you sleep, something takes over. A hidden architect begins constructing worlds. Fluid, symbolic, surreal. Streets appear and vanish. People from your past speak in voices you've never heard. Time skips, rooms shift, and you're there in the middle of it all, playing a role you didn't choose, in a story you didn't write. But who did write it? Is there a part of you, deep in your unconscious, that designs the dream? Is your consciousness passively receiving these scenes, or is it actively shaping them from behind a curtain? One possibility is that your dreaming mind is like an improvisational artist, constantly pulling from memory, emotion, instinct, and imagination to weave a scene. But another possibility is that there's a deeper director at play, what Carl Jung called the self with a capital S, a larger field of awareness that encompasses both conscious and unconscious material. And that field might have its own intentions. In waking life, you're guided mostly by your ego, your sense of self, your goals, your narrative. But in dreams, the ego often vanishes. You become someone else, or no one at all. And yet something still steers the dream forward. Patterns emerge, themes repeat, characters return with messages, warnings, or riddles. This is where the concept of archetypes becomes powerful. Jung believed that archetypes are universal patterns embedded deep within the human psyche. Shadows, heroes, mentors, tricksters. You've seen them in myths, movies, and your own dreams. These are not just random elements. They are the language of the unconscious, communicating with you through symbols. And if that's true, then your dreams aren't just noise, they're messages. Think about the last time you had a recurring dream. Did it change over time? Did it respond to something happening in your life? Was there a feeling you couldn't shake, even after waking? Many dream researchers believe that our dreams reflect unresolved emotional tensions, social conflicts, or internal contradictions. But they don't just reflect them passively, they work on them. The dream seems to test different outcomes, reshuffle scenarios, and highlight what your conscious mind refuses to see. And here's the strange thing. Many people report having conversations in their dreams, not just with dream characters, but with voices that seem to come from nowhere, with presences that know things the dreamer doesn't. These presences are often described as guides, spirits, inner teachers, or even higher selves. So let's ask a provocative question. Is it possible that your consciousness, while asleep, becomes more porous, more open to information outside your waking frame? Some theories suggest that consciousness isn't produced by the brain, but filtered through it. Like a radio tuning into frequencies, the brain might limit the full spectrum of awareness during waking life, so you can function and focus. But in sleep, especially in dreams, the filter loosens, and the raw signal flows in. Could that raw signal contain more than just memory fragments and emotional echoes? Could it contain insight? Could it even contain intelligence? This is the doorway into lucid dreaming, a state where your conscious awareness reawakens inside the dream. Lucid dreamers often describe a sudden realization. Wait, I'm dreaming. And in that moment, the dream world doesn't vanish. It becomes clearer, more vivid, more real. You can fly, talk to dream figures, walk through walls, or sit quietly and ask your subconscious a question. And sometimes you get an answer. What's happening here? In a lucid dream, the higher executive functions of the brain are partially reactivated. Self-awareness returns, and with it comes agency. You're no longer just a dream character, you become the dreamer within the dream. And yet, the dream doesn't collapse. That means your mind is capable of holding two states at once, dreaming and knowing you're dreaming. This dual consciousness, awake within sleep, raises deep questions about the nature of the self. Because when you're lucid, you can experiment with the architecture of the dream. You can change the landscape, ask for clarity, call out to your higher self, or the unconscious or source, and something may respond. Sometimes as a voice, sometimes as an image, sometimes as a direct knowing. In studies, lucid dreamers have even been able to solve waking life problems, rehearse real-world tasks, and practice emotional regulation. In other words, they're not just playing, they're using their dream consciousness as a tool. This suggests that the unconscious mind is not just a container of repressed thoughts. It's an active system capable of learning, simulating, and communicating. It's an intelligence that doesn't speak in words, but in symbols, sensations, and synchronicities. And when the conscious mind collaborates with it, the results can be transformative. So, what if the unconscious isn't just the backstage of consciousness, but another layer of it? One with its own rules, its own language, and perhaps even its own goals. That idea reshapes the question we've been asking. It's not just where does your consciousness go when you sleep, but which parts of your consciousness awaken when you do? Because maybe, in sleep, a different self rises. One less constrained by time, memory, or logic. One closer to the core. And if you can learn to meet it, to become lucid, not just in dreams, but in the process of dreaming, you might discover that you are not a single self at all. You are a system of selves. Some waking, some dreaming, some ancient, some new. All parts of a whole that stretches deeper than you've ever imagined. And this has profound implications. Because if your consciousness is multi-layered, then every night is not just a journey inward, it's a journey between selves. And sometimes you bring something back. A feeling, a message, a shift in perspective. Maybe that's why people say, let me sleep on it. Because something in the dream world works in the background, adjusting, clarifying, creating. Maybe your unconscious mind is not just a leftover evolutionary tool. Maybe it's your origin, your foundation, your most honest voice. And if that's true, then sleep isn't just rest, it's access. When you're awake, your life seems to move in a straight line, past, present, future. One foot in front of the other. But when you sleep, that arrow of time bends. Suddenly you're a child again, or somewhere that doesn't exist, or watching yourself from outside your body. You experience events out of order, meet people who've long passed away, or live entire lifetimes in the span of a few minutes. This bending of time in dreams raises a critical question. Is the experience of time something your consciousness creates? Your waking brain is constantly building a timeline. It strings your memories together to create the illusion of a continuous self. But this sense of continuity is not as solid as it seems. In fact, your brain is constantly editing, rewriting, and sometimes fabricating that timeline to make sense of the moment. Neurologist Oliver Sacks wrote about patients who would completely lose their ability to form new memories. yet still carried out conversations and even played music with precision. Somehow, their consciousness functioned without time as we know it. This suggests that memory, rather than time itself, might be the framework your consciousness uses to navigate reality. But during sleep, especially in dreams, that memory-based framework loosens. You remember things that never happened, forget things that matter, and experience emotions tied to people you haven't seen in years. These dream memories can feel as real as waking ones, and sometimes more intense. So what's going on? Some researchers believe that dreaming is a form of temporal disintegration. The mind breaks apart the chronological order of experience to reprocess and recombine memories in new ways. This isn't just random noise, it may actually be how you learn, adapt, and grow. Dreams have been shown to help with memory consolidation, particularly emotional memories. But more than that, they seem to recontextualize those memories. For instance, you might dream about a childhood home after a breakup, not because you're nostalgic, but because your mind is mapping current pain onto old emotional templates. It's connecting timelines. And this raises a profound idea. Your consciousness, while dreaming, might operate in a nonlinear mode, a state where time is not measured in seconds, but in meaning. In this nonlinear state, the boundaries between past and present blur. You may dream of a long-gone friend right when you're facing a difficult decision, or you may find yourself reliving a forgotten moment that suddenly feels relevant. Is this just coincidence, or is your dreaming mind intelligently navigating the emotional terrain of your life? There's evidence that it might be. Studies in neuroscience show that during REM sleep, the brain's default mode network, associated with introspection and self-referential thought, becomes highly active. This network doesn't just recall memories, it simulates different outcomes, predicts futures, and explores alternate versions of yourself. So while you sleep, your consciousness might be running simulations, rehearsing conversations, playing out what-ifs, examining how your past is shaping your future. This means dreams aren't distractions from reality. They're part of how your mind constructs reality. And the dreaming self might have access to connections your waking self overlooks. Some spiritual traditions have long claimed that in sleep, the soul journeys through different layers of reality. The Tibetan yogas of dream and sleep, for example, teach that dream states are not illusions, but subtle realms that can be trained and navigated consciously. In those systems, time is flexible, space is symbolic, and memory is not limited to one lifetime. Whether you see that as metaphor or metaphysics, the implications are the same. Your consciousness is not limited to the present moment. It can roam, it can retrieve, it can reframe. But there's more. Have you ever had a dream that predicted something? Not in a mystical, dramatic way, but perhaps you dreamed of someone and the next day they called, or you dreamed of a place and weeks later you found yourself there. These are often dismissed as coincidences, but they're common enough to raise questions. Could your dreaming mind detect patterns, emotional, behavioral, environmental, that your waking mind ignores? Could it be running calculations, scanning possibilities, and surfacing them through symbolic imagery? This is not to say dreams are literal prophecies, but perhaps they are probabilistic ones. Your mind might be modeling future scenarios based on subtle signals, tones in someone's voice, unresolved tensions, emerging instincts, and testing them in dream form. In that sense, dreaming is like mental time travel, not to escape reality, but to prepare for it. This brings us to an even deeper idea. If your consciousness can navigate across time frames, past memories, current problems, future fears, then maybe it's not bound to the timeline at all. Maybe time is a dimension your consciousness moves through, but isn't confined by. This is where the concept of the non-local self comes into play. In quantum physics, certain particles seem to influence each other instantaneously, regardless of distance. This non-locality defies classical logic, suggesting that entanglement allows information to be shared across space without traversing it. What if your consciousness works the same way? What if your thoughts, dreams, and intuitions are not limited to the local, linear timeline your body lives in? What if there's a deeper connected field, what some have called the collective unconscious, where your mind taps into a broader reality? Some neuroscientists speculate that consciousness arises not from individual neurons, but from dynamic networks that interact with the environment in real time. Others propose that consciousness is a fundamental field, like gravity or electromagnetism, that your brain receives rather than generates. And in both views, the idea is similar. Your consciousness is not a static object. It's a flow, a process, a movement through dimensions of information. So during sleep, when the sensory input quiets and the timeline dissolves, that flow becomes more fluid, less local, less linear, and you find yourself drifting across not just space, but time. You revisit childhood, you glimpse potential futures, you receive images you can't explain. And sometimes those moments change you, because memory is not just about the past. It's also how you imagine what's coming. Your dreams might not just help you remember who you were, they may help you become who you're meant to be. Throughout most of your day, your consciousness feels like a tight, localized experience. You are you, defined by your name, your body, your history. But when you sleep, that identification begins to dissolve. You can become someone else. You can observe yourself. You can speak in the languages you don't know, visit landscapes you've never seen, or simply float in a vastness without any sense of identity at all. What does that tell you? It suggests that consciousness might not be as fixed to the self as we tend to believe. And if that's true, if consciousness can exist without the strict boundaries of identity, then perhaps what you experience while sleeping is a kind of return to a more fundamental state. There's an idea in neuroscience called ego dissolution, often observed during deep meditation or psychedelic experiences. During ego dissolution, the boundaries between self and other fade. People report feeling one with their environment, with the universe, or with something much greater than themselves. Interestingly, similar neural patterns appear in studies of lucid dreamers and those in REM sleep. The default mode network, the brain system that maintains the narrative of the self, becomes disrupted or reorganized. This doesn't mean you cease to exist. It means your consciousness becomes decentralized. You stop anchoring yourself in a story and begin to experience a more fluid awareness, an awareness that might extend beyond your usual sense of self altogether. So where does your consciousness go when you sleep? One possibility is that it expands, that the tight personal lens of waking life is only one mode, and that during sleep your awareness begins to reconnect with a broader field. Think about dreams where you seem to know things you shouldn't, where you have access to information you don't recall learning, where you interact with people, archetypes, or even entities that feel deeply real, but don't exist in your waking life. Are these mere hallucinations, or is your consciousness tuning into a larger informational space? Carl Jung believed that the unconscious is layered. There is a personal unconscious made of your own memories and experiences, and a collective unconscious that contains patterns, symbols, and knowledge shared by all of humanity. He observed that people from completely different cultures would dream of the same mythological creatures, motifs, and struggles. Jung called these shared symbols archetypes, and they seem to arise most clearly in dreams. From this view, your consciousness during sleep isn't just accessing your own internal world. It's swimming in something deeper, something transpersonal. Modern science can't confirm a collective unconscious, but it's slowly beginning to explore similar ideas through the lens of complexity, science, information theory, and quantum systems. The brain is not an isolated machine. It's an open system constantly interacting with its environment, and consciousness may be the emergent property of those interactions, not just within your head, but with the entire informational field around you. If that's true, then the boundaries between your mind and the world are not as rigid as they seem. And sleep, with its lowered sensory input and loosened identity, may allow that boundary to soften. In this state, your dreams might act like antennae. They don't just replay personal memories. They pick up on emotional currents, energetic patterns, and subtle information you're not aware of consciously. This might explain why so many people report dreams that feel bigger than themselves. Some describe meeting deceased loved ones, receiving messages, or encountering symbolic guides. Others speak of flying through space, entering realms of light, or dissolving into pure awareness. Skeptics dismiss these as fantasy, but to those who experience them, they often feel more real than waking life. And here's where things get strange. There are rare but documented phenomena where multiple people report sharing a dream. In most cases, they're close, family members, partners, or twins. They'll wake up and report the same setting, event, or character from a dream the other had at the same time. There's no proven mechanism for this, but if consciousness isn't isolated, if it can synchronize with other minds under certain conditions, then maybe dreams are not as private as we think. Some physicists, including those exploring quantum consciousness theories, have proposed that the fabric of reality may itself be informational, and that consciousness is not generated by the brain, but connected to this deeper field, interacting through unknown mechanisms. Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff's OR theory suggests that consciousness arises from quantum events in the microtubules within neurons. Though highly speculative, this model implies that the mind might be capable of accessing information that isn't strictly local to your body or brain. Even if that turns out to be wrong, the concept is useful. It reminds us that consciousness might not be fully explained by classical mechanics. And that opens the door to the idea that when you sleep, your consciousness doesn't just shut off. It enters a phase where it can expand, unbound by identity, time, or space. Sleep researcher Rubin Neyman has argued that modern science treats sleep as a brain function, but neglects the subjective side of it, what it actually feels like to dream, to drift, to dissolve. He calls dreams a second life we live silently, and believes we've lost touch with their importance. Historically, cultures around the world revered dreams. Indigenous tribes used dreams for healing, guidance, and decision-making. Ancient civilizations considered dream realms to be just as real, and in some cases more real, than waking life. Why? Because in those dreams, people experienced connection to ancestors, to nature, to unseen realms, and to each other. That connection hasn't disappeared. It's simply become quiet. So when you sleep and your waking mind dissolves, what's left is something more subtle, a kind of witnessing awareness, a presence that doesn't need a name or a story, a consciousness that is not confined to the self, but touches something far greater.
It's not about fantasy or escapism. It's about remembering what you are beneath the roles, the thoughts, the identity.
And this leads to a final question. If consciousness isn't just something you have, but something you are part of, then maybe sleep doesn't take your awareness away at all. Maybe it returns it. Maybe the act of dreaming is a reconnection to the source of your being, the field in which all minds are linked, where time bends, and where the self is not lost but expanded. And if you've ever had a dream that lingered for days, one that shifted something inside you, then you already know this truth. You are not just the person in the dream, you are also the dreamer, and maybe the dream itself. As the night fades and morning begins to break through, something stirs within you. A slow return, a reassembly of the self. You may not even notice it, but something profound is happening. Your consciousness, once dissolved, expanded, dream-bound, is folding itself back into a familiar shape. You open your eyes, you remember who you are, and the mystery of where you've been becomes just a whisper behind your waking thoughts. But now that you've followed the thread through every layer of this experience, you know something you didn't before. Sleep isn't unconsciousness. It's not the absence of awareness. It's the migration of awareness into a different form, a different landscape, a different dimension of being. Let's trace what we've explored. From the shifting brainwave patterns that change how you perceive reality, to the dream states that stretch and bend time, to the quiet stages of sleep when your sense of self temporarily vanishes. Every phase has shown us that consciousness doesn't just stop. It transforms, it adapts, it moves through veils we're only beginning to understand. Some scientists argue that dreams are just noise, fragments of memory stitched together by a mind still trying to make sense of the day. But the human experience of dreaming, vivid, emotional, deeply symbolic, points towards something more. You've seen that dreams are not merely strange stories. They are encoded experiences, reflecting both your inner world and, possibly, something larger and more universal. Consciousness, it turns out, is not just a passive observer of reality. It shapes what you experience. It filters, creates, and sometimes transcends the limits of space and time. While awake, it seems local, specific, grounded in your body. But during sleep, that tether loosens. You become both observer and creator, both witness and participant, both self and something more. Consider again the mystery of awareness itself. No scientific theory fully explains why the physical processes in your brain lead to subjective experience, why neurons firing in a certain pattern create the taste of strawberries, the sound of thunder, or the feeling of falling in love. This hard problem of consciousness remains unsolved. And yet every night, without fail, you enter a world created entirely from your own awareness. A world that often feels just as real as the waking one. So where does your consciousness go when you sleep? It returns to itself, to the raw field of perception, freed from the constraints of time and ego. It visits memories, it weaves symbols, it reflects your fears, your longings, your hidden wisdom. Sometimes it creates impossible worlds. Sometimes it just floats. Sometimes it connects you to something you can't describe, but know deeply. You've learned that there are patterns in this invisible space, dream cycles, archetypal stories, neurological shifts. But there's also something else, something science hasn't fully charted, something intuitive, something ancient. It's the sense that you are more than a brain in a body. That consciousness might not originate from matter, but may instead be what matter emerges within. That your awareness is not trapped by sleep, but liberated by it. And when you consider all this, something shifts in how you approach the night. You stop seeing sleep as a blank space to endure. You begin to see it as a return to the depths of yourself, a return to the part of consciousness that isn't distracted by identity, time, or responsibility. A return to a state where awareness can simply be, without the burden of needing to define itself. In many spiritual traditions, this nightly cycle of sleep and waking is seen as a rehearsal for something even more mysterious: the transition from life to death and beyond. Just as you fall asleep and reawaken, it's believed that consciousness leaves the body and returns to a greater whole, only to emerge again in a new form. Whether or not you accept that, the metaphor is powerful. Because every night you dissolve, and every morning you rebuild. And in that rhythm, something ancient speaks. Sleep is not a shutting off, it's a doorway into altered states of consciousness that allow you to reset, explore, and integrate. It's a realm where time stretches, where identity dissolves, and where the boundaries between you and the universe begin to blur. So tonight, when you lie down, remember this: your awareness isn't going away. It's going inward, into the unknown, into the symbolic, into the silent spaces where thought gives way to something deeper, where dreams rise,
where memory floats,
where consciousness itself unspools into infinite directions. And in that space, you're never alone, because at the heart of it, you're connected to your own mind, to the collective stories of humanity, to the possibility that you are not a fragment, but a thread woven into something vast. Sleep well, dream deeply.
and remember, consciousness doesn't sleep.
It travels.